Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Christian Harris and welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast. I was delighted today to be joined by Dene, Vicky and Matt from Armour Risk Consulting, which is a health and safety consultancy, as the guys explained, serving a wide variety of customers. And in thinking about this episode, we had two kind of key topics that we were keen to delve into. The first was the pandemic, pretty topical, obviously, from a safety perspective. And then secondly, moving that into the kind of broader health agenda. So talking about, mental health, how that affects people in different ways, how the move to hybrid working or working from home may affect that kind of thing. And so we have a really good conversation talking about those challenges, talking about some practical advice on what you can do to be in the best position for 2022 and beyond to ensure that you're doing the right thing in these areas, and also thinking about the bigger picture of why this is important. So, it's unlikely that there's going to be much enforcement about mental health, for example, because, how can you enforce that from a HSE perspective, as we talk about? But actually, there's a moral compass question here, and there's also a business benefit to getting this right. Increasingly, thanks to the pandemic, as well as other things going on in the world, people are much more aware of these kinds of issues, and they expect companies to behave in the right way, whether they're members of staff or whether they are indeed customers of those companies. So lots to think about, lots to grapple with, and I'm sure you'll get a lot out of listening to this episode. As always, if you enjoy it, please hit follow. Please give us some likes and comments and reviews. Reviews in particular really do help other people to get to know about the podcast and share in some of the insights and the stories that you will have benefited from in listening yourself. With that then, let's get into the conversation and join myself with Dene, Vicky and Matt. Hope you enjoy it. Cheers. Welcome to the podcast, to the three of you. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Christian.
Good to be.
Should we start by having a bit of an intro into the three of you individually and perhaps the business as well? Dene, I don't know if you want to start by giving an overview of the business and then a bit about yourself, your role and your background, and then we'll move on to Vicky and Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Christian. I'm Dene Mitchell, and I'm the director here at Armour Risk Consulting. We're a health and safety consultancy. We're based up in central Scotland, but we travel all over the UK. Our purpose really is to help small, medium, and even large businesses just get their health and safety in line, get everything in order. We provide that support with respect to their policies, their risk assessment and documentation, but just how they manage health and safety on the ground too. We've been doing this for 5 or 6 years now as an organization, as a company. We kicked off really as part of the property industry, but we've expanded to all sorts of kind of wild and weird industries that we help with, from food manufacturing to property to zoos is another one. And so it's really kind of given us a really good insight to lots of different industries and organizations and how they work from a health and safety perspective. I kicked off the business, like I say, 5 or 6 years ago. My background is in science and engineering, and then I moved into the property industry and then into health and safety. So basically, when any lab works or engineering work comes up, my name appears on that one. And we anything else, I'll let Matt and Vicky kind of go into their areas of expertise too.
Perfect. Vicky, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I joined Armour about 2 years ago. Previously, I'd worked for a nationwide retailer in a health and safety role, and so I sort of bring retail, and previously I'd worked in hospitality. So any kind of client inquiries that come from there, that's sort of where my interest comes into it. I do a lot of high risk assessments as well. That's one of my specialties, and mental health is another one.
Perfect. And Matt?
Yeah, hi, good morning. So I act as a health and safety manager and consultant for Armour. I joined Armour in January this year. But my background is I got involved in health and safety nigh on 20 years ago when I joined the health and safety executive, so I've got very much an enforcement-led background. But for me, it's very much about educating and influencing people that I work with, the clients that I work with, getting to know the businesses, how they operate, their kind of ethos, management style, and help develop their own in-house teams so they can actually be more self-sufficient. As Dean has already mentioned, we have quite a diverse kind of background, so I have the opportunity to get to know lots of different businesses, but also apply my background and knowledge, because I am very much a generalist when it comes to health and safety. Yeah, and thoroughly enjoying it, and being able to speak to people like your good self and all the people you are in contact with, and trying to get the health and safety message out there and help people where I can.
Yeah, and that's a very noble goal and a mission that we're all on, I'm sure. And what's interesting, getting the background and the overview of the business, is how diverse the client range is, and that's something that I really love about being in this space, because although obviously I specialise in a very small segment, and I'm dealing with the same kinds of issues, it could be, as you say, a zoo. Well, I've never done any work in zoos, but it could be a zoo or a hotel or a cruise liner or a manufacturing. I mean, last week I was in a black pudding shop, and then a leisure centre, and then it's very, very diverse, and I think that's great to keep interest levels high, isn't it?
Yeah, it really does kind of test you sometimes. It tests the tools that you have at your disposal, but it's good. It keeps you sharp.
Yeah, definitely. So when we were, thanks firstly guys for joining, and when we were kind of planning the episode and what we were going to talk about, you guys highlighted a couple of key trends or issues that you were keen to discuss, which have been important for your clients and the work that you're kind of doing. So Dean, I don't know if you want to just give a quick overview of what the 2 points are you were keen to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be no surprise to anyone that we've spent probably the last 18 to 24 months helping businesses keep running in a safe manner during the pandemic. And it's, with all the changes to legislation and guidance that's happened over that period, it's a little bit of a moving goalpost. We've been helping businesses work their way through that. And it kind of came to a head probably over the summer there, August, September time, when it was kind of like businesses making their plans now for the medium long term. How are they going to get their employees back into the workplace? And that became a bit of a trend at the time. We've now seen at this point where businesses tend to have returned by this point. There's still some exceptions. There's still some businesses that will be working from home for a long time yet. What we're now starting to see off the back end of that is less of the practical safety side of things with respect to the pandemic, things like having hand sanitizer around the building, making sure that people are appropriately spaced at their desks. We're now starting to see the knock-on effect from a mental health, from a health perspective. It's the kind of health of health and safety, where we're starting to see welfare, mental health, good or bad issues crop up now. People start to flag how they're feeling about coming back to work, the hybrid working arrangements and things like this. So I guess we've started to look over the last couple of months at the return to the workplace from two perspectives, from the safety, the practical element, and from the health, which is primarily the mental health element. And that certainly is a trend at the moment, is a lot of people are starting to see concerns within their workforce about how mental health is managed within the workplace.
Yeah. It's been something that we've talked a lot about, haven't we, over the years, but people throw around some staggeringly high numbers, but it does feel like we've kind of reached that pinch point maybe where it's actually starting to happen now, rather than just be something theoretical.
Exactly. There seems to be a bit of a scale here where what we see within our own organization and within clients as well is that you will get a sliding scale of those that are quite happy and keen and desperate to get back into the workplace because they've found it a huge challenge over the last 18 months to be working from home. Then on the opposite end of the scale, you have those that are rightly concerned about returning to the workplace. Those with commutes, those who work in a large organization, who there's thousands of people there. And it's how do businesses go about managing that so that they can have policies and procedures in place from a health and safety perspective that actually addresses both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. And Vicky, given some of the sectors that you mentioned, you sort of specialise in, I guess you've seen an interesting hybrid of, you know, some clients that have probably been operational the whole time, and then others that had to close and then reopen, and now they're dealing with some of these things. I mean, how would you describe the challenges from a kind of operational health and safety perspective, and what were some of the stumbling blocks you've seen, or some of the perennial things that people have needed support with?
So it varies from client to client. Some clients have already already seen it coming, and sort of have some really good mental health policies and well-being policies in place. There are clients now who are sort of on the back foot now, trying to put policies in to help employees feel more comfortable. You know, whether it's COVID anxiousness or other anxieties, maybe financial worries, even worries about their own businesses, as businesses are restructuring. You know, people going into redundancy potential and stuff like that. So all these things can suddenly create a mental health problem, and sort of then companies are trying to work out the best solution to that. And it's sort of, we're sort of helping them give the advice, but we can't be very prescriptive. You sort of have to listen to your employees and what they want, because then they'll not be bought into it. They sort of need to give their input and feel part of the process for you to get a really good, robust well-being policy.
Yeah. And has the government guidance on COVID been helpful overall to this, or lots of room for interpretation, which leaves you know, some challenges?
I think that our main challenge over the past 18 to 24 months has been interpreting the COVID guidance that's come out from various devolved administrations, because you know, there's usually been a time lag of 2 to 3 weeks where one brings out a certain set of guidelines and then that's adopted 2 to 3 weeks later, or there are some subtle differences. And then it's also disseminating between what affects business and what's actually domestic. You know, there tends to be quite a lot of confusion about what clients or businesses need to do. And that's been very much part of our job as health and safety professionals over those past 24 months. But to pick up on a point that you raised yourself and spoke about with Vicky, is that, you know, some businesses actually haven't stopped operating, so they're actually a lot further down the road than a lot of businesses are only now starting to come back to the workplace. So they're handling it a lot better. Their controls are in place. What we've been doing is, from a practical sense, is speaking to clients that have not yet fully come back to the office, helping them with practical, sensible solutions. You know, the physical things you can do, whether, you know, simple things like, you know, social distancing, hand sanitizer, you know, reduced workspace occupancy levels, that kind of thing. But the big challenge that we're now finding, as Dean said at the start, is basically convincing or getting staff to come back into the office in a manner that's comfortable for them, because they've been working at home a long time. Some may take a hybrid form of working, some may choose to work full-time at home. But what we're finding is that, you know, as Vicky has also said, that a lot of staff now are asking for help or struggling, and, you know, counselling services are now oversubscribed. They're like 3-month waiting lists for current employee assist programs. So there's a real kind of pressure building up now, and we're not fully back open or back to normality yet. But we were talking about this the other day. It's, you know, where staff may say, I'd like to work at home full time now. Do employers have a duty to say, well, what kind of support network do you have at home, you know, to look after your mental health? Are you working alone? You know, do we need to maintain some sort of contact, and what does that look like, and what's the frequency of that? Because, you know, the workplace is conducive to good mental health, because there is interaction with your colleagues, your friends, things like that. And if people say, well, actually, I just want to maintain working at home all the time, we now need to consider, okay, is that a health and safe environment for you from a mental health and well-being point of view?
Yeah, it's a big can of worms as well, isn't it? Because everybody's perspective on this is different, you know. So some people I know were desperate to get back to work because they missed that human interaction, and other people are desperate to stay at home because, you know, they're happy at home, they feel more productive at home, they don't really want the risk of traveling on the train or commuting or whatever. And yeah, how to deal with that is quite difficult. So, I mean, what do you kind of advise as a sort of a roadmap then for clients, to kind of confront that challenge? How do you sort of step by step work through that? Because that's not easy.
It's not easy at all. And sorry. There's no one size fits all to this, Christian. But the first thing that from our experience, what we've attempted to do and what we've talked to our clients about is the first thing is, what do you already have in place? Vicky had alluded to it as well, that some businesses are already ahead of the curve. They saw this coming. What do we already have in place? But also, have we communicated that out to our workforce? Do people know that we have employee assistance programs in place? Do they know that we have a wellbeing and mental health policy in place? Do we know it's reflected in our risk assessments? So the first thing to do is determine what you currently have. Share that with your employees. Inevitably, there'll need to be some kind of enhancement above and beyond that. One of the first things to do is not make assumptions about what people will need and what they want. Survey, ask them. We've sent out surveys to our clients and internally. Engage with your employees to find out what it is they want, what actually they're enjoying. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If they're enjoying a hybrid work situation, the majority of people, stick with that. But what enhancements can you make? How can you help people further? We've got an example where we looked at with one company, with one of our clients, where they thought they were doing the right thing by talking about compressed hours, giving people a half day off and doing a 4.5 day week. But through surveying those people, it wasn't necessarily the case that that's what they wanted. And would we be actually causing a stir within the organization if that's the route that they took? It really is key to find out what people want. And inevitably, you will get a whole sliding scale of different responses. And it's finding that, to a certain extent, the best fit, but also then addressing people on an individual basis as well.
Did you have something to add to there, Vicky?
Sorry, say that again?
Did you have something to add there, Vicky? Because you were going to respond to that.
Yeah, it's definitely about, as Dean said, finding out what people want and include it in your risk assessment now. The ISO released a standard 45003 in June, and it sort of clearly states about social hazards and sort of including that in the risk assessment now, so it's properly documented, and it sort of supports also the HSE standards, the management of stress standards that you can follow, which again is just as Dean said, it's getting employees together, listening to what they want, and then implementing those actions and reviewing it on a regular basis, because things will change as time moves on, either with COVID or just generally society and other issues that may be arising within the company.
And how, I mean, just out of interest, because I'm a business owner, and it's kind of, you obviously want your staff to be happy and productive and all that stuff, but then obviously there are certain things that perhaps staff might like to do or want to do that aren't really reasonable and practical from a business delivery perspective. So how do you kind of bridge that gap?
It's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, the key words that you said there, Christian, was reasonable and practical. Yeah. And that we're kind of treading on.
I've been drilled into always using those words.
They're great words to use. They cover a multitude of sins. We're stepping a little bit into HR territory, but I think there is addressing concerns and specific issues with employees and addressing flexible working requests is a great example. And you may, let's say, for example, you've got a business that you've implemented a hybrid working policy. You've got employees working 2 days a week in the office or in the workplace and 3 days at home. Now, if an employee comes to you and suggests that actually I'm more productive if I just work at home 5 days a week, well, we need to address that. Is that reasonable to do that? Will the business allow that? There has got to be a line in the sand at some point that says, yes, we'd love to give you this, but that would be at the detriment to the business. And it's a balance. And again, those lovely words, reasonable and practical, but at least giving the employees the forum, the open door to flag up and to make requests. And another area that we've been encouraging people is to lean on the wellbeing action plan kind of process and templates. So in addition to what you might have as a blanket policy across the business, It's encouraging employees as part of their development, as part of their goals and objectives for the year, is to not only focus on the kind of workplace practicalities, but also think about what they would need from a wellbeing and mental health point of view. To document that in a wellbeing action plan that lays out for me to perform my job in a safe and with good mental health and well-being. These are the things, the practical steps that I might need. And they can be simple as I need 45 minutes over lunch to be able to go out and get some fresh air. Or it may be I need to be working compressed hours or staggered hours. But it's allowing employees to make those requests and to come to you with those. And that's when you can decide as a business whether they're reasonable or practical.
I'd be interested to get your perspective on this from your past in enforcement. I mean, do you think this is something that, well, is this kind of stuff being enforced already? Has it been enforced in the past? Or do you think this is something that, we might see some enforcement in this area moving forward? Or is it going to be quite difficult for the HSE to go down this route?
With respect to COVID measures, yes, they're already carrying out inspections, or either in person or by telephone, just making sure measures are in place.
Yeah.
So that you can look at the physical stuff, whether the risk assessments are in place, whether other controls are in place. That's fine, just to make sure businesses are doing what they should be doing. When it comes to mental health and well-being, that is very hard to enforce because it's like Scotch mist, basically. You can't pin it down. And it's more about looking at the management systems within that business to recognise, yes, it is a potential issue and what they're doing to address it. So it's more of a kind of management review when it comes to mental health and well-being. And it's always been the case that HSE or other enforcing bodies have looked at management systems, usually under HSG 65. So I think there will be more and more emphasis because, as we're seeing across health and safety, it's almost moving away from the safety aspect and now focusing very much on the health, because the numbers we're now starting to get through kind of occupational health are just skyrocketing, so that they're going to start putting more and more resource into this. And certainly, the UK government has provided a lot more funding towards enforcing authorities to help deal with the pandemic as well, which is welcome. At long last, but I don't want to get political. So yeah, I would foresee that there's going to be more management inspections coming up as well with regards to mental health and well-being, just to try and make sure employers is doing as much as they can or is reasonable.
Yeah.
Christian, I don't think.
Go on, Vicky.
So I don't think this is just, it isn't from a webinar I attended to about the ISO standard. It isn't just something that's confined to Britain. This is a worldwide issue that has been building. It's like lockdowns that we've all went through throughout the world has sort of been that moment for the world to stop and evaluate their work-life conditions and the work-life balance. And this is why you're seeing more people come back and start asking, because they're valuing their work-life balance now and they're going to ask these questions and have a better quality of life.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think we're at a really interesting tipping point, actually, because I'm going to be a little bit blasé and sort of stereotypical, but the younger generation, particularly having lived through this, but even before the pandemic, I think had more, again, sort of on average, more interest in ESG kind of issues, and I think that there's going to be an expectation moving forward. If you're a business, if you want to attract and retain staff, or even if you want to attract and retain customers, that you're going to have to be attuned to these agendas and you're going to have to be doing stuff, because otherwise they're just going to vote with their feet and you're going to struggle.
That's exactly right, Christian. It's like anything within the health and safety. There's the legislative part to it, but there's also the moral and the financial elements to it. And with these, the moral parts of this is fairly self-explanatory. You're looking after the people that are providing you with a business. But from the financial perspective as well, it's voting defeat, exactly like you say. Recruitment is key at the moment, and staff retention is key, and it's going to be one of the big topics for 2022. And those organizations that are not forthcoming with their focus on mental health and employee well-being will be left behind. They will lose staff, they will not be able to retain staff, and they will not be able to recruit staff. Some of the examples that we've seen, the questions that you get asked at interviews with some of our clients, there is a lot more focus up front about flexible working, about well-being plans and things like this. If you are not competing from that perspective, it will impact your bottom line.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And how to, you know, as you said earlier as well, sort of straying into the HR territory, but it's almost kind of, you know, does that need to be all drawn together in some way, and whether, you know, typically, you know, HR would sit aside from safety and risk, wouldn't it? But actually, there's an argument to say that they need to be brought more closely into alignment, I guess.
Exactly. This is one of those areas where it becomes a little bit, the line is less clear between HR and health and safety. But, you know, you need to work in tandem with your HR departments or your HR support. The policies and procedures that may historically fall under HR need to be reflected from a health and safety point of view in your risk assessments and your health and safety policies. We focus a lot in health and safety traditionally on training, whether that be fire safety training or whether that's working at height training. But a large trend now is, what training do employees and managers have from a mental health point? How are we preparing line managers to be able to have those conversations with their employees? And that all falls under the control measures that you would have in a traditional health and safety risk assessment.
Matt made a good point that from a, you know, this kind of mental health agenda is going to be quite hard to enforce. And I think if we cast our minds back to the start of the pandemic, there was this fear that there was going to be a tsunami of claims, you know, of, you know, I caught COVID and it's your fault, Mr. Employer, because, you know, you didn't have the right measures in place or whatever. I don't think we've seen that. What we seem to have seen more of is, you know, people being a bit more pragmatic and accepting, because it's a pandemic, I suppose, and they're not trying to pin the blame on their employers, so which is good. But from an enforcement perspective, I interviewed Sarah Jane Brown from Cornwall Council recently, who heads up the sort of COVID response team there, and she was explaining that, you know, they've been pretty pragmatic in their approach. Is that what you've seen on the ground as well, Vicky, in terms of, you know, any sort of enforcement or reviews from HSE or other enforcement bodies?
I don't think any of my clients have had any visits. I know that one of the hotels I had, they were very cautious about sort of reopening, because their main clientele was quite older. So we definitely went back through the legislation on a regular basis, but we did have to do a risk assessment for an external event that they really wanted to have, because it was a centenary of sort of their regiment, and so I had to write the risk assessment and be very of everything, but including COVID, and I had to go through the council, and I've actually went through the council with no issues, so I took that as a positive, that nobody really needed to come and see any further detail. But yeah, I think they're just being pragmatic, because we've chosen an outside venue and stuff like that. But I haven't seen anything from that.
Dave, I think what I've seen is, and it may just be the nature of the fact that the types of people that will come to us are those with a sensitivity about it anyway, need some support. But we've seen a high level of attention to detail on it, and we've a high sensitivity. A lot of our clients want to do the right thing. You're absolutely right, Christian, from the respect of, there's an expectation that there was going to be a glut of investigations and potentially prosecutions. But and what this has done is helped sharpen the mind of some of our clients to make sure that they're doing the right thing. And sometimes it can be a little bit, you need to talk them down from the ceiling and actually talk about what pragmatically and practically can you do.
Yeah. What have you been saying, Matt?
Well, to go back to your earlier points about, you know, the fear that there would be, you know, multiple prosecutions because, you know, your employees caught COVID within the workplace. I think the HSE were quite good very early doors to say, okay, if you get an outbreak, that falls within a certain category, then yes, you report it under to RIDDOR, so reporting injuries, diseases, dangerous occurrence regulations, you report it. But that was quite clear on the kind of workplaces that would apply to. So kind of, labs that would do testing, that would be, so you get COVID occupationally because you're actually handling the virus, or potentially within care services like the NHS. So that kind of, was very specific about who it was focusing on. So general employers wouldn't have to worry about that too much, because, as you said, trying to track the genome of every single virus strain would be quite hard to prove where it came from. So that was quite clear cut. But what they did realise was that they didn't have the resources to be able to go out and visit every single business within the UK. So this is where the additional funding came from UK government, to actually go, we're going to outsource this to various different organisations to act on HSE's behalf, to go out with a pro forma set of questions, and if they got any crosses in the boxes, then that would be referred on to a workplace contact officer, and if they didn't have any luck, then that would go to an actual inspector. So it's very kind of low level, but it's about hitting as many businesses as possible. And yes, there has been some concern, and I do have clients that have been visited multiple times by these third parties, but it is a very low-key, light touch kind of visit as well. So that's what I have seen. I haven't heard of any prosecutions. I think the worst it's got is probably a telephone call from the HSE themselves as part of a follow-up to make sure that employees have done what they should be doing.
Yeah, and Dean made an interesting point there about trying to almost have to talk clients down from the ceiling, because everybody's been so keen to do the right thing when it comes to COVID. To what extent do you guys think that is something that might stick with us? So, I'm not saying, of course, that most companies didn't care about health and safety and well-being before. Of course they did, but I think there's clearly been a raised emphasis on this in the last 18 to 24 months. I mean, can we be hopeful that will stick with us, and we'll see, continuing strong focus and therefore some improvements in some of the other areas of safety, for example, like what I do, slips and trips, year after year, same sort of numbers, things happening because of perhaps the focus on that hasn't been quite as strong. What do you guys think about that?
I think always trying to look for positives, Christian, that one of the things that come out from this pandemic is that the general population's awareness of health and safety has gone up. So, for instance, everybody now knows what PPE stands for or what it is. Yeah. Employers, I think, will be driven by their staff and their expectations. I don't think staff will be afraid to voice their concerns. We're talking about COVID, and I think that awareness has now been raised across the piece. So that will help drive health and safety in other issues as well, I'm sure. It's been a real focus, so that will drive businesses. I don't think employers will be able to take their foot off the pedal, as it were.
Yeah. Vicky, would you share that view?
Oh, totally. I don't think this light has been shown on health and safety, and I don't think it is going away. As I said earlier, I think staff are going to want that focus, because they just want to work in a safe and healthy environment. So no, I think this is just going to grow, and it'll be better for the overall country, because people will become healthier, there'll be less accidents, so it just will be that momentum will just push forward.
Yeah. So going into 2022 then, with that as a context, what do you think sort of strategically, Dean, people should be thinking about, in terms of, we're a company, we're looking at next year's plan, should we be doing reviews? Should we be starting with fresh sheets of paper? How should we be kind of going about planning for the next year?
Yeah, that's right. From our perspective, I think, there is a lot of good stuff in place. And as Vicky and Matt have talked about, there's a lot of light being shone on to their health and safety aspects. There's a lot of good things in place. One area that we've been focusing on, and we've been working with a lot of our clients over the last 6 months, and we'll probably move over into 2022 again, is about culture. It's about riding that wave of the focus on health and safety to implement a culture of health and safety within a business. We've spent a lot of time talking to our clients and actually helping our clients upskill their general workforce increase their knowledge of what is required. Let people know what a risk assessment is, how to access a risk assessment, how to perform their own risk assessment. Training within the organization. There has been, I feel, and Matt might agree with me on this, is a move away from documentation for documentation's sake and reams of policies that nobody ever reads, to actually more kind of practicalities. And we've talked to one of our clients in particular about the boots on the ground aspect. Who have you got that is actually being the health and safety person on the ground who's walking around? Is this person trained? Are they working on expanding that culture and that knowledge of health and safety within the organization? I think the trend will move more towards a general focus throughout the workplace, rather than the annoying health and safety manager who has the high-vis vest and clipboard and is getting on the backs of everybody who he works with. I think it will be now more of a focus on culture and improving generally throughout the workforce, the focus and spotlight on health and safety.
Yeah, agree with that, Matt?
Yes. In short, no, it goes back to my previous point, which is a rising tide lifts all boats, and I think that's what we're seeing now. We get more engagement across the piece, and one of the favourite bits of my job is going around speaking to people, and they are more than willing to engage now. And once you get them talking to, they've got something to say, and it's about utilising the knowledge and experience that employers have on site. That untapped resource. It's like, okay, we'll nurture that. And especially that, if we have hybrid working patterns, you're not going to have the same amount of cover, whether it's first aiders, fire wardens, etc. So you will need to train up more staff to cover. And that's no bad thing, because that's investing in your staff. And I imagine we will be seeing a lot more people stepping forward and raising their hands to do that kind of stuff now.
Yeah, that must be something, Vicky, you've seen a lot in the hospitality sector, where you've got a lot of changes in staff and new people coming through the door all the time, and having these folder upon folder sitting on the shelves of policies and hundreds of thousands of words of this and that and the other thing. People just aren't going to engage in that, are they?
It's sort of making it a bit more. You've got some clients who rely on online training, but yeah, you've got some clients who want back to face to make it a bit more real. It's all very well sometimes going through just your online training, but you can sit that every year. But actually, when you sit down, if somebody gives them a bit extra investment, put somebody in front of them, and maybe makes it a bit more real with real life experiences, then they just become so much more engaged, and their understanding becomes better if they understand manual handling of moving a beer keg rather than just the box that they always see on the online training. It's tailored for them, so it's a bit of sort of having extra time, but again, just giving them the example that they can apply to their real life working examples.
Yeah, and that supports the whole piece around hybrid working as well, because I suppose you're going to have to, almost develop not individual, but sort of different risk assessments for different levels of working from home, I suppose, versus working in the office. Yeah, interesting time. So more and more work for you guys to do. Lots more consultancy needed.
Yes, but as we say, if we can, as Matt uses the kind of analogy, the rising tide, if we can be part of that and help ride that crest a little bit of the focus on health and safety, then that makes our job easier and kind of eventually puts us out of a job.
Well, I don't know about that. I think there's always going to be a need, isn't there? I mean, I often use the analogy of a GP. So you go to the GP if you're a business owner, you've got to know about everything in the business, but you can't be a specialist in everything, and so you're going to need some consultants or some doctors to help. So I think there's always going to be a space for outside support, particularly because you can bring the context of, as we said right at the start, other sectors and other businesses. Well, actually, I know that you're a zoo, but actually in this hotel we found that this worked, or I know that you're a school, but in this hospital we found that this worked, and you can bring different fresh perspectives as well. So I think that's one of the key areas of value, I would guess.
Yeah, it's one of our clients' favorite questions is, but what are they doing? What's everyone else doing? And that then feeds into that general feeling of they just want a little bit of support, a little bit of pat on the back and say you're doing the right thing. They want fresh ideas, and that's why they go to an external consultancy like ourselves, even if they do have the health and safety resource in-house as such. The third-party external kind of glance over their systems is invaluable to not only make sure that they've got what's in place and everything is right and ticking over correctly, but also just that kind of sense of security and that feeling of we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. I'm conscious of time, guys. Was there anything that you were keen to discuss that hasn't just come up in the conversation? Any final kind of points that we haven't yet raised, or if not, then perhaps we can go into talking a little bit about what resources you've got available, how you can support, and how people can find out more.
Just to reiterate again, this whole area of mental health and well-being and linked to the pandemic crosses over between health and safety and HR, but there's parts that both need to be addressed. Where you've got mechanisms in place to support your employees, that not only needs to be shared with employees, but it should be reflected in things like your risk assessments. If we're encouraging employees to be accessing these more and reviewing these and making them more dynamic, then they need to be also very accurate. So from a health and safety perspective, yes, it's boring, but make sure that this is all documented. Make sure that you have what's in place, that you say you have in place. And make sure that those policies are there and that you're sharing them with your workforce, because there's no point paying for these things like employee assistance and nobody utilizing them and everyone complaining that you don't have them.
Yes, very, very good point. Very good point. And Matt and Vicky, any particular resources or things that people should have a look for, or is it just kind of visit the website? So, if you've got any downloads or webinars or anything like that?
Well, I always say to my clients, if you've got a question, just pick up the phone and ask. If you can't find it, then use us as your first point of contact. We'll either know the answer or be able to put our hands on it very quickly and point them in the right direction. We also have access to HR companies as well as employment law. So if we don't know the answer straight away, we can certainly find out fairly quickly. And as I always say, there's no such thing as a stupid question. I'd rather people just ask, just for a bit of clarity. Vicky, you got anything?
Well, actually, last month at the beginning of this month, we did a webinar with our HR partner. So that's available. Dene isn't on our website.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's available on the website. That's armour-risk.co.uk. We've got a few different bits of resources there, Christian, and we've got, as Vicky's pointed out, a couple of good webinars on the practicalities of return to work and then the kind of softer side of the return to work, the mental health. We've got a couple of checklists available that are free to download as well, if you ever want to just run through and make sure you've got your workplace set up correctly. And also just want to point out some other kind of resources that we found really useful. Mind have some fantastic resources for both managers and employees about well-being action plans and mental health, and just some general support and areas that you can go to. So these resources are invaluable. They're way more expertise in things like mental health than we could be as health and safety consultants. But there's some fantastic stuff out there that's free to hand.
Fantastic. What I'll do is perhaps you could send me any links like that, Dene and guys, and I'll add those into the show notes when we get the podcast out. But thank you very much for sharing your time today. Really good discussion. I think looking at these points perhaps a bit more broadly and going into that health agenda is definitely, as we said, the way that things are moving. So really good, really topical stuff. And we've managed to avoid talking about any of the potential changes in legislation and enforcement and so on and so forth, because everything's very fluid at the moment. But this will serve as a good resource for people. So thanks very much, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please give us reviews if you think we've earned one, and likes and comments on social media are always very much appreciated as well. We'll see you again next week for another interview. Cheers.